Hello, and welcome to Secure Talk, a podcast where we explore the critical world of information security innovation and compliance. I'm your host, Justin Beals, founder and CEO of StrikeGraph. Together with our expert guests, we'll provide you tools and tips to help your business thrive in the rapidly evolving cybersecurity environment. Josh, thanks for joining us today on Secure Talk to talk about cloud security gaps. Before we dive in, can you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Justin. My name is Josh Bullers. I'm the head of engineering and AI here at StrikeGraph. A lot of my focus is more on the AI side of things, but also have to balance that out with our engineering stack and working closely with our infrastructure team and other engineers on the team to make sure that we're not missing anything else to productize these things.
Yeah. You and I have worked together for a while, but that entire time that we have worked together, almost every software we've deployed has been to the cloud. Certainly, we're both aware, whether it's an on-prem deployment or in a cloud deployment, how easy it is to misconfigure some of these systems. Like we have a lot of opportunity to change how we want the architecture to work or what's unique about our innovation. We have up here this slide that shows how, the types of cloud misconfigurations that are possible. How common are these particular types of issues?
Yeah, I mean, cloud misconfigurations are really common, actually. It's really easy to have just a certain piece of it kind of drift out of where you expected it. And I think studies are showing that over 80% of organizations have at least one misconfiguration at any time. So the doors that we're kind of looking at here can represent just a few of the areas that we might see some misconfigurations. There's things like excessive IAM permissions or other areas like that are really common and easy to do. As you roll out new services, new parts of your product, you end up in a situation where you might overgrant in a certain area or give too many admin permissions somewhere or to someone when you should be locking those things down. You might not be keeping your vulnerabilities up to date. It's really easy to get pinned on a certain package version somewhere. Or you might leave like S3 kind of open a little bit more than anticipated and things not encrypted there or certain things along those lines. So it's really easy to drift away from that perfect environment you might start with. Every new thing you add is a potential point where you leave something open.
Yeah. I think of three things that are different from on-prem deployment in a way. One is that certainly the reason that we like the cloud is that it's very fast to provision new hardware, but also that means that we can build a lot of different things very quickly without any necessarily have to be very thoughtful about it. The second is that everyone has some level of access to it, and we didn't normally do that in the data center. It was pretty limited. And then finally, it's always changing. That I think that's why these are really complex systems, and they're very dangerous because, of course, we store our software and all of our customer data in these large hyperscalers. Yeah,
for sure. I do think in that scenario, you have to be a little bit trusting of your vendor as well. Be particular in how you choose your vendor. That's why some of the big players exist, is because they have the staff to kind of close those loopholes as best as possible on their side. But yeah, definitely something to keep in mind there.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. It's really helpful. So next, we wanted to talk a little bit about financial data. It does seem to require a lot of extra attention in the cloud, and we know a lot of financial systems have been moving to cloud environments. Tell us about what's so precious about this financial data.
Yeah, I mean, there's naturally a little bit more security that needs to be, and forethought that needs to come into that situation. It's one thing to accidentally leak somebody's username or something else that's not very sensitive. While we do deem those things sensitive, it's not the same level as somebody's like credit card information or social security number or those other bits and pieces. So if you're in an environment where you are working with that kind of data, you really have to approach it with the thought of like this matrix, for example, that's showing the roles within an organization and the different access to systems they might have. Things might be time bound, they might be full access, read only. It really needs to be thought through in terms of what the role needs to do to actually achieve their job duties, not necessarily what they might want access to. I think, like looking at the CFO, for example, you might think, oh, just give them access to everything, but they don't actually need access to everything to do their job. They have people that work on their teams that can compile that information and provide it to them when they need it, instead of having them lurking in every system, poking at everything, and maybe forgetting to shut something off, to not copy it to their local. And I think a classic one are the time bound one stuff, like with auditors or other situations where they might come in, they might need read only access, but you want to tie that to like a window in time and then shut it off afterwards. So it's not just a door left open, as we were discussing before.
Yeah. Having access is very different than the permissions that you receive. And that's why we need these types of matrices, right? To understand who should have access for what amount of time. If we don't do that very granularly, then we'll have a security incident where we leak even private data that should be leaked internally. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. And I mean, there's different levels of that exposure too, right? Like you mentioned internally, like that's one risk. It can drift out of the right hands into the wrong hands, but external exposure is a big risk too. So you got to keep in mind how quickly it can escalate.
Yeah. So another area that is pretty new to a lot of businesses, but a lot of work is being done in it, is in developing their own AI models by training data and looking at what type of intelligence they can layer in their software. Um, AI models certainly present a unique security challenge in the cloud. How do you think about creating secure environments in which to develop and release them?
Yeah, I mean it's a tricky one, right? And this image here really gives a good example of like at a high level how you might provision that, but then as you get into the weeds, you really got to think about your situation. So in this, you might see like, okay, we've got our training data that's stored in kind of a secure encrypted vault that only gets transferred to locations as needed, maybe for training or read access, different things like that. I think something you have to keep in mind in that situation too is your training data. You should probably have careful thought too about how it's even reaching that point. Like, does it have certain PII that shouldn't be in there? Do you want that in your training data? Once it's in a training data store, it's very realistic for it to get trained into the model. And so if you're using something like generative AI now, then something you don't think about is the exposure that it might regurgitate that information somewhere at a future point in time if you train it on that. So I think that's your first line of defense is know what you're putting in there, right? And then you've got the natural things like making sure that you're having things encrypted in transit, making sure that you've got endpoints that are properly secured and ready to access certain models or to kick off training of models. And you really want those segmented. You don't want somebody to have access across the board unless they are somebody that needs to poke at all those things. But even then, you want to make sure that they're like spinning it up, spinning it down, and kind of going through some of those situations. And then the last kind of quick note on that is it's really common to have monitoring and logging around these systems, especially in these kinds of systems where PII may be present at some point in time, whether that's before you anonymize it, before you make synthetic data off of it. You really got to be careful about what you're putting into those systems. It's one thing to log like that you hit a certain point and like, oh, it broke or something like that. It's a whole different to just spit the entire thing out and be like, oh yeah, this customer's data is here and we're going to use it in this way. And because that's another area then that you may forget it's there and somebody gets access to the system and you have a data leak.
Yeah. It feels to me like some of our baseline rules around security planning can just really serve us well here. One is the data. Where does it live? What are we doing with it? Who has access to it? And how do we minimize its exposure secondarily? And no matter what kind of system you're trying to develop, from modeling to training, I think if you think about that, and your environment and how you want to deploy it, you'll come up with the best possible solution.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about cloud environments. I think I've got an example on the left here and an example on the right. I think that the one on the left really kind of shows the way we might have used to do things, a little more hodgepodge, or, and the one on the right maybe a little more comprehensive. what's the important changes to you here, Josh, that you're seeing?
Yeah, I think the concept of segmentation here is the key thing, right? In the before times, as you mentioned, or just in a basic environment, you might have like everything in one environment, and once you're inside of that environment, you can just go across all those boundaries. I think you need to make sure that everything is encrypted end to end, make sure that there's only access to certain things, make sure that there's IAM policies if you're in like an AWS environment, to make sure that people or systems only have access to the data they want. Like it's really common for somebody to just like give the read all permission in those scenarios when you do really want to segment that down. What is the system doing? What is the person accessing? And then you also, in this kind of environment, you want to make sure that there's some kind of monitoring going on. Like, is there something that's outside the norms that maybe you should be flagging? Because in this kind of segmented situation, you kind of see what's normal behavior and what's abnormal behavior. And you can kind of build out those rules then to flag like this person ventured into an area that we didn't know they had access to or that they shouldn't be in or something like that and kind of flag it, right?
Yeah. I also think that, not seeing is not knowing. And without a good network diagram, and these are not great ones, but some sort of 50,000 foot view of how you see everything piecing together is critical to being able to operate it effectively.
Yeah. And I think there's new tools that it used to be, to your point, that it was really hard to come up with those network diagrams, but there are new tools to really help keep those up to date so that it's not such a burden to maintain them and that you can keep those more visible, more up to date. Yeah, I think use the right tool for the job in that situation and try to stay on top of it.
Josh, I'd be amiss if I didn't throw a curveball at you. Um, let's talk a little bit about package dependencies and software bill of materials and keeping software up to date. How do you think about that from a security as a head of engineering?
Yeah, it's one of those things that can get out of hand really quickly, right? Like you have a breaking change in a package, so you pin to it and you move on with your life, or you have a Docker version that you're, or like a system in Docker that you're using just because the dependencies work. And I think that's the dangerous moment right there, right? Like you've got to pause, make sure that there's some kind of tool in your system, whether it is like a wholesale vulnerability scanner, if it's something purpose built to your Python environment or on AWS as you push images, like just something that's flagging those in real time. You want to stay on top of those vulnerabilities because it's one thing to say, oh, we're ignoring like a low or a medium because we just are biding our time to upgrade. But that's a slippery slope into like the critical vulnerability, right? Like suddenly you have a critical and you're like, oh, we just can't unpin because we didn't stay on top of it. And in some cases you may get by, in other cases that may immediately bite you and somebody kind of gets in through something that they shouldn't be in through. And it's all because you didn't stay on top of that kind of upgrade in time. And you've got to stay on top of that tech debt. It's a pain at times, but yeah, you got to carve out just enough time to stay on top of it and upgrade as often as you can.
The statistics tell us that staying up to date is safer than staying out of date.
Oh,
So,
for sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
good.
I mean, just seeing the output from that vulnerability scanner should scare you enough when you see like the red or the yellow. It should be an indicator that maybe you should give it a little attention.
That's right. Yeah. Well, Josh, thanks so much for joining us and talking about cloud configurations and security and a little software development lifecycle today.
Yeah. Thank you.